When I spotted my son standing at the bus stop on Lambton Quay with my granddaughter at 3:30 on a Wednesday afternoon, I felt something cold settle in my chest. He was supposed to be in the silver Toyota Highlander I'd helped him buy 14 months earlier, a reliable ute that cost the better part of $42,000. Money I'd put forward without hesitation because I wanted my son safe. I wanted little Maeve safe. And I wanted them never to have to worry about getting stuck somewhere in our Wellington winters. But there he stood, hunched against the southerly, his jacket too thin for the wind coming off the harbor, holding Maeve's small mittened hand as she bounced on her toes trying to stay warm. My son's name is Callum. He's 34 years old. He used to laugh easily, the kind of laugh that filled a room. The man at the bus stop wasn't laughing. His shoulders were drawn up high, his jaw was tight, and his eyes had a hollow look I hadn't seen on him since his mother passed when he was just a teenager. Maeve saw me first. She let out a squeal that cut through the wind and started waving both arms. "Grandad! Grandad!" Callum's head snapped up, and for just a heartbeat I saw something flash across his face that looked an awful lot like fear. Then he forced his mouth into a shape that was meant to be a smile. He bent down and whispered something to Maeve, and she went quiet straight away, her little face confused. I crossed the street and joined them under the bus shelter. "What in the world are you doing here, son? Where's the Highlander?" Callum's smile wobbled. "Oh, hi, Dad. We were just running a few errands in town. You know how parking is around the central business district. I've been retired from the magistrate's court for nearly 4 years now, but I sat behind that bench for 31 years before that. I know a lie when I hear one." The pitch of his voice was wrong. He couldn't quite hold my eyes. And little Maeve, bless her. She opened her mouth like she had something to say, but Callum's hand tightened on hers ever so slightly, and she swallowed her words back down. "Callum," I said carefully, "you live in Karori. There's loads of parking near the train station out there. You wouldn't take a bus into the city with a 5-year-old in this weather. Where's your car, son?" He stayed quiet for so long that 2 buses came and went. People shuffled past us with their grocery bags from Moore Wilson's. Students laughed on their way back to the university. Finally, when the shelter had emptied around us, Callum leaned closer and spoke so quietly I had to lean in. "They took it, Dad." "Who took it?" But I already knew. A father always knows. Coercive and her father. They said it was for my own good. They said I was being reckless with money and that they'd manage transport for me from now on. His voice cracked on the last word. "Dad, please don't make a scene. Maeve doesn't need to hear this." The car was registered solely in Callum's name. I'd made sure of that when we bought it together at the dealership in Petone. "Son," I said quietly, "that ute is legally yours. They can't just take it." He let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Legal stops mattering when they have other ways of pressuring you. My old prosecutor's instincts woke up in my chest like a dog that hadn't been fed in months. I'd seen this before, more times than I care to count. The slow erosion, the careful isolation, the way an abuser builds a cage around someone using nothing but words and quiet threats. "What other ways, Callum?" He glanced down at Maeve, who was kicking pebbles across the footpath, oblivious. He lowered his voice further. "Source's father, Hamish. He says he found out things. About our family. About Mum. He said if I made trouble, he'd make sure I lost custody of Maeve. He said our family's name would be dragged through every court in Wellington." I felt the wind go out of me. "What things about your mother?" "Not here, Dad." "Please." "Maeve." The bus pulled up. Callum tensed, ready to bolt. "Callum, listen to me. This stops today." He shook his head, panicked. "You don't understand. Hamish has connections. He's been a partner at his firm for 30 years. He knows judges. He knows everyone. If you start swinging, he'll have me painted as an unfit father before the week is out. Just let me handle it." He pulled out an old Nokia, not the iPhone I knew he'd had, and squinted at the screen. "I have to go. I was only meant to be away for an hour. If I'm late, Terrace will want to know why." He was being timed. "By his own wife." "Callum," I said, gripping his shoulder, "don't you tell anyone you saw me. Don't mention this conversation. Just go home and act normal. Can you do that?" He nodded once, sharply, and the relief on his face nearly broke me. As they boarded the bus, Maeve turned and waved at me through the foggy window. Callum didn't look back. The bus pulled away, and I stood there in the wind, with my hands in my pockets and a kind of cold fury building in my chest that I hadn't felt since the worst cases of my career. I walked. From Lambton Quay all the way down to Oriental Bay. And by the time I got to the seawall, I had a plan beginning to form. I rang my old colleague Geoffrey Marlowe from a bench overlooking the harbor. Jeff and I had worked together back in the late 90s when he was still with the police, before he set up his own private investigation firm out in Lower Hutt. He was the most discreet man I'd ever met, and he owed me favors from a long career's worth of cases I'd helped him build. "Jeff, it's Edmund. Edmund Whitcomb." "Eddie?" "Good Lord, it's been years. How are you keeping?" "Not well, Jeff. I need your help. It's about my son." There was a pause. "What's the brief?" "Hamish Lockhart, partner at Lockhart and Pemberton in Wellington, and his daughter Saoirse Lockhart, married to my Callum, about 6 years ago. I need to know everything about both of them. Previous relationships, financial history, anything that's ever been whispered about either of them. And Jeff, I need it quickly. There's a 5-year-old caught in the middle." Jeff was quiet for a moment. "I'll have something for you in a week. Make it 3 days. 3 days then. Watch yourself, Eddie. Lockhart's a name I've heard before, and not in good company." That evening I sat in my study in Wadestown with the harbor lights spreading out below the window, and I tried to retrace every wrong turn I'd missed. Callum and Saoirse had got married 6 years ago. A beautiful summer wedding at a vineyard in Martinborough. I'd liked Saoirse at first. She was clever, articulate, the daughter of a respected lawyer. Maeve had come along the next year, and for a while everything had seemed lovely. But then the Sunday roasts at my place had started getting cancelled, just every so often at first. Source's parents had a do, or Maeve was sniffly, or Callum was on call at the engineering firm. Reasonable things. I'd given them their space because I thought that's what good fathers did. I thought I was being respectful. The first real warning had come about 2 years ago. Callum had rung me one weekday afternoon, his voice strange and tight. "Dad, did you ever say anything to Saoirse about her not being good enough for me?" It had stopped me cold. "What?" "No, Callum. Why on earth would you ask me that? She says you told her at the engagement party that you thought I was settling, that I was making a mistake." I hadn't said any such thing. The engagement party had been at Saoirse's parents' house in Kandala, and I'd barely spoken to her one-on-one. I'd been polite, complimentary, on my best behavior. I told Callum so, plainly. There had been a long silence on the other end. Right. Maybe I got it muddled, but he hadn't got it muddled. Someone was lying to him about me, and that was the moment, 2 years ago, when I should have grabbed hold and not let go. Instead, I'd let it slide. I told myself he was a grown man and I needed to trust him. Then the financial squeeze had started. Saoirse had convinced him to put everything into a joint account so they could plan properly. She had pushed him to leave the engineering consultancy where he'd been thriving and join her father's property development arm as an in-house engineer, supposedly for better hours. He'd taken a pay cut to do it. Hamish had become his employer. Slowly, year by year, my confident son had become someone who apologized before speaking, who second-guessed his own memories, who flinched whenever his phone buzzed. I'd noticed all of it. I just hadn't known what to call it. The phone rang at 10:15 that night. Callum's number. But when I answered, it wasn't Callum. Edmund, it's Source. I hope I haven't woken you. Not at all. Is Callum all right? He's fine. Just gone to bed early. He had a difficult day. Listen, he mentioned he ran into you in town this afternoon, and I just wanted to make sure there wasn't any awkwardness. Why would there be awkwardness, Source? She gave a small, indulgent laugh. Well, you know how Callum can be when he's overwhelmed. He gets a bit dramatic, makes things sound worse than they are. He told me he might have given you the impression that we'd taken his car away from him, which is just nonsense. The Highlander's having some work done. The transmission was playing up. She was good. Smooth. Warm. The kind of voice that could talk a charge down to a caution. That's a relief, I said. Which mechanic? I might use them myself. A tiny pause. Oh, it's a friend of Dad's. Out in the hut somewhere. I'd have to check with him. Right. And Source, why did Callum take a Nokia into town today instead of his iPhone? A longer pause. His iPhone's been giving him grief. He switched over until we can sort a replacement. Edmund, I really do think Callum's been struggling lately. We've had a chat with the GP, and there's a question of whether he might be experiencing some kind of stress-related episode. The doctor mentioned that family interactions can sometimes set him off. We just ask that you give him some breathing room while we sort things out. There it was. The preemptive strike. I kept my voice even. I appreciate the call, Source. I'll be sure to be careful with him. Thank you, Edmund. I knew you'd understand. I sat in the dark for a long time after that. Then I rang Geoff Marlowe again. Jeff, push it. 48 hours. Not 72. And start with Hamish Lockhart's previous business associates and Source's previous partners. I want to know if there's a pattern. Eddie. You sound like a man who's got someone in his sights. I do, Jeff. I do. Jeff rang me back 40 hours later and asked me to meet him at a cafe in Petone. He was waiting in the back booth with a thick manila folder and a cup of long black going cold in front of him. Sit down, Eddie. You're going to want to be sitting. He opened the folder and walked me through it. Source Lockhart, 31 years old, had been married once before. A short marriage, 18 months, to a young surgeon named Tobias Renfrew. The marriage had ended after Tobias took out a protection order. The grounds were emotional abuse, financial coercion, and isolation from his family in Christchurch. The order had been quietly settled, and most of the records had been kept out of the press because of Hamish's connections. Before that, Source had dated a man named Patrick Donnelly for nearly 4 years. Patrick had ended up moving back to Ireland after losing most of his savings to what he later called a series of investments that Hamish had recommended to him through Source. He'd never recovered financially. And then there was Hamish himself. Jeff slid across a printed page from the Law Society's disciplinary records. Hamish Lockhart had been censured twice, once for a conflict of interest involving an elderly client whose estate he'd managed in a way that benefited his own family. Once for professional conduct unbecoming relating to his treatment of a junior associate. Neither had cost him his practicing certificate, but they had cost the firm 2 senior partners who'd resigned in protest. Eddie, Jeff said quietly, this isn't a one-off. This is a system. Source is the front. Hamish is the engine. They target professional men with family money, get them isolated from their support, get the assets routed through joint structures, and then squeeze. Tobias lost his practice. Patrick lost his savings. Your Callum is somewhere in the middle of that same machine. I felt very tired and very awake all at once. How do we stop it, Jeff? Carefully. Hamish is too well connected to come at directly. We need him to expose himself. We need them both to say things, on the record, that they cannot walk back. Then that's what we'll do. The next morning I rang Hamish Lockhart's office and asked his secretary if I could pop in to discuss a sensitive family matter that I felt would be best handled discreetly between fathers. The secretary booked me in for the following afternoon. Before that meeting, I made a second call to a man named Rangi Te Awina, an old friend of mine from law school who'd built a quiet but very serious specialist practice in family law and had no time at all for men like Hamish Lockhart. I told Rangi everything. By the end of the call, I had a strategy and a wire and a colleague waiting in the wings. Hamish's office was on the 7th floor of a tower on the terrace. Glass walls, leather chairs, a view of the harbor that would have impressed anyone less angry than me. Hamish himself stood up to greet me with a politician's handshake. He was 68, silver-haired. The sort of man who's been told he's distinguished his whole life and has come to believe it. "Edmund, lovely to see you. Cywars mentioned you'd been a bit worried about Callum. I'm glad you've come." I sat down opposite him. The recorder in my breast pocket was already running. "Hamish, I'll be straight with you. I'm worried about my boy. I think he's struggling. And after Cywars rang the other night, I started thinking it might be time for me to step in financially. I'm not getting any younger, and I'd rather see Callum settled while I'm still here to help." Hamish leaned back, and I watched the calculation move across his face like a cloud. "Edmund, that's a wonderful instinct. And honestly, your timing couldn't be better. We've been quietly carrying some of Callum's costs because frankly he's been a bit unreliable with money lately. Saisei and I have had to step in more than once." "What sort of costs?" He gestured vaguely. "The mortgage on the Karori house. Some unpaid invoices. Maeve's school fees at Samuel Marsden. It adds up." It did add up. It also wasn't true. I'd seen Callum's payslip 3 years ago, and he could afford all of that easily on his old salary. The question was how much of his current salary was actually finding its way to him. "Well," I said, "I'd like to put aside a meaningful amount to look after Callum and Maeve. But I'll be honest, Hamish, I don't want to give it directly to Callum if he's in a fragile state. I'd want it managed properly, by someone with experience." Hamish's eyes warmed. "That's very wise, Edmund. Sorsha and I have actually been thinking along similar lines. We were going to suggest a family trust, with me as trustee, given my background, and Saoirse as a co-trustee. Callum could be a discretionary beneficiary. That way, the funds are protected from his impulses, and Maeve's future is secured. Callum wouldn't have direct access at all? For his own sake? No. He'd request. The trustees would consider. It works beautifully in cases like his." He smiled. The smile of a man used to being agreed with. "I've drafted similar arrangements for clients with troubled adult children many times. I know exactly how to structure it so that it's airtight." "And the Highlander?" "Cywars mentioned it's at a mate's mechanic. Would that come under the trust as well?" He didn't even blink. "Actually, we've already moved that into a holding entity. It made the insurance simpler. We can fold that into the trust too. Honestly, Edmund, the more we wrap up cleanly, the better for everyone, especially Maeve. And the threats Saoirse and you have apparently made against Callum about custody, do those go into the trust as well? Or are those handled separately?" The temperature in the room dropped by about 10 degrees. Hamish's smile didn't move, but his eyes went flat. "I beg your pardon? Callum told me that you've threatened to take Maeve from him if he doesn't cooperate. He says you've claimed to have damaging information about my late wife, his mother. I'd like to know what that information is, Hamish, and I'd like to know it now." He looked at me for a long moment, and then he made the mistake that men like him always make eventually. He decided I was bluffing. "Edmund, between us, your son is not well. He's paranoid. He's been telling Saisei for months that we're conspiring against him. Frankly, the picture he's painting of himself in court would be devastating. I haven't threatened him. I've simply made it clear that if he ever tries to take Maeve away from a stable household, the truth about his mental health, and yes, about some matters in your family's past that I came across through professional channels, would all come out. That's not a threat, Edmund. That's a prediction. Professional channels, I said. You mean clients you've represented who happen to mention my late wife? I mean, Edmund, that I know a great deal about a great many people, and I'd hate for any of it to become relevant. I leaned forward. Hamish. My wife Lillian died in 2003 of pancreatic cancer at the age of 41. There is nothing in her past that anyone could weaponize. There is nothing in mine. You've been making it up, and you've been using it to terrorize my son for 2 years. His face shifted then. The veneer cracked, and underneath it I saw the real man for the first time. And he was as cold and as small as I'd suspected. Get out of my office, Edmund. With pleasure. Just one more thing. I took out my phone and showed him the screen. The recording app, still running. The sound waves moving with my voice as I spoke. You have a lovely view, Hamish. I'd enjoy it while you can. I walked out of that tower with my heart pounding like I'd run a marathon. Geoff Marlowe was waiting in the car park. Ranji was on speakerphone in his office. We'd done what we needed to do, but the trap wasn't sprung yet. We still needed Sauersay on record, and we needed to get Callum and Maeve out of that Karori house before Hamish realized what we had. That afternoon, while Hamish was, I imagine, wringing his daughter in a panic, my son did something I will never stop being proud of. Callum rang me from a payphone outside the New World in Karori. He was breathing hard. Dad, I found a USB drive hidden in Sauersay's bedside drawer. There are recordings. Of me. Hundreds of them. Some of them are conversations I had on the phone with you, Dad. With my old colleagues. With Maeve's teacher. And some of them, Dad, some of them are spliced. There are sentences in my voice that I never said. She's been making evidence. I sat down hard on my kitchen chair. Where are you now, son? I'm in the supermarket. I've got Maeve. I told Sauers I needed bread. Stay there. Don't go home. Geoff Marlowe will be there in 15 minutes. He's going to drive you both to my house. Do not answer Sauers's calls. Do not answer Hamish's calls. Can you do that? Yes. One more thing, Callum. I know what they've done to you. I know none of it was real. I know you're not unwell. I know you're not a bad father. I know you've been gaslit for years, and I should have stopped it sooner. I'm sorry, son. He didn't answer for a moment. Then he said, in a voice I hadn't heard from him since he was a boy, thanks, Dad. When Geoff brought them through my front door an hour later, Maeve ran straight into my arms and burrowed her face into my jumper. Callum stood in the hallway, holding the USB drive like it weighed 10 kilos. We didn't go to the police that day. Rangi advised against it. Hamish had police contacts, and we needed the evidence chain to be unimpeachable. Instead, we did something cleaner. The next morning, with Rangi at my side, we filed an urgent without notice application in the family court. Day-to-day care of Maeve to Callum. A protection order against both Sauersay and Hamish. The recordings, the spliced audio file, my conversation with Hamish, and Geoff's dossier on Tobias Renfrew and Patrick Donnelly were all attached as evidence. The judge granted everything we asked for that same afternoon. Sauers turned up at my house that evening with her father in the passenger seat. They didn't get out of the car. They sat in the driveway and stared at the front door for nearly 20 minutes. Then they drove away. They never came back. 2 weeks later, Hamish was suspended from practice, pending an investigation by the Law Society. The conversation I'd recorded, combined with the historical evidence about Tobias and Patrick, gave them more than enough to act on. 3 months after that, his practicing certificate was cancelled. Coercive was charged with offenses relating to interception of private communications. She pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and received a community-based sentence and a sizable order to repay Callum the value of the Highlander and several years of unpaid wages that should have been his. The divorce was straightforward in the end. Callum got full day-to-day care of Maeve. Coercive received supervised contact, which she stopped attending after about 6 months. That was almost a year ago now. These days, Callum and Maeve live with me in the old villa in Wadestown. Callum's gone back to his original engineering firm, and they took him on like he'd never left. He laughs again. Not all the time. Not yet. But more often than he did. He started seeing a counselor in Thorndon who specializes in coercive control. And slowly he's putting the pieces of himself back together. Maeve started year 1 at the local primary school last term. She comes home with paintings she made for me, full of suns and rainbows and stick figures of her dad and her granddad holding her hands. She sleeps through the night now. She didn't when she first came to live here. For the first month, she'd wake up at 2 in the morning and pad down the hallway to check that Callum was still in his bed. After a while, she stopped checking. A few weeks ago, Callum and I sat out on the back deck after Maeve had gone to bed. The harbor was a sheet of black glass below us, and the lights of the city were spread out like coals. "Dad," he said. "Why didn't I see it sooner?" I'd been waiting for that question. I'd had time to think about my answer, because, son, you trusted the woman you loved. Because you grew up in a house where love was kind. You had no template for what they were doing to you. That's not a weakness. That's what made you targetable, and it's also what makes you the kind of father Maeve needs. I keep wondering if I would have got out on my own. Maybe you would have. Maybe you wouldn't have. What matters is that you did get out, and that you found the recordings yourself, and that when I rang you on a payphone outside a supermarket and told you not to go home, you didn't go home. That took more courage than you realize. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want to do something with this, Dad. I keep thinking about all the men who don't have a father like you, who get told they're imagining it, who never find the USB drive. Then do something." He started talking, quietly, with a couple of men's support services in Wellington about helping them set up a program for men experiencing coercive control. It's slow work. There's a lot of stigma, a lot of men who don't believe it can happen to them until it's already happening. But Callum's good at it. He's got the kind of credibility that comes from having lived through it. I want to leave you with a few things tonight. Before you turn off your phone, or your radio, or your headphones, because I think they matter. The first is this. Coercive control doesn't begin with a shove or a shout. It begins with a smile and a small request. It begins with someone telling you that your family doesn't really understand you. It begins with someone offering to manage things for you because you're too stressed. It begins with the cancellation of small rituals. The Sunday lunches, the weeknight phone calls, the catch-ups with the mate you've known since school. By the time it looks like control, it has already been control for years. The second is this. If someone in your family suddenly seems quieter, smaller, more apologetic, more anxious about their phone, you may be watching it happen. Don't tell yourself you're imagining things. Don't tell yourself it's not your business because they're an adult. Stay close. Keep showing up. Keep ringing. Even if they don't answer, your steady presence is a lifeline, even when they can't admit they're drowning. The third is this, and it's the one I wish I'd known when Callum was first slipping. You cannot rescue someone from this kind of cage by storming the door. You rescue them by leaving the door open and the lights on and a meal warm on the stove, and by being unshakably the same person you've always been, so that when the day comes that they can finally walk out, they know exactly where to walk to. And the last thing is this. To anyone listening tonight who recognizes themselves in Callum's story, who is at the bus stop in the southerly with a child's hand in theirs and a phone they're not allowed to use, please hear me. You are not unwell. You are not unreliable. You are not imagining it. The voice in your head telling you something is wrong is the only honest voice in the room. Trust it. There are people who will help. Shine, Women's Refuge, the It's Not Okay campaign, your GP, a trusted friend, a parent who's been waiting for years for the phone to ring. The door is open. The light is on. You are not alone. My name is Edmund. My son is Callum. My granddaughter is Maeve. We are still here, and we are still a family, and we are louder than we used to be, and we plan to stay that way. Thank you for sitting with us tonight. If this story reached you, leave the name of your town in the comments below so I can see how far it traveled. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, send it their way. You never know whose bus stop you might be standing at when they need a familiar face to look up and see. Take care of each other out there. Good night from Wellington.